Our guest for tonight, Mr. Tom Shelton. Hello, Tom. How are you, sir?
Hello there, Jamie. How are you tonight?
It's good to have you with us. TV star. I mean, you're just. I mean, I know that teachers in the know, we got a big following in this Facebook group. But I mean, you were a TV star yesterday, though. So fresh off a KET appearance. How was that last night?
It was all right. That was the second time on Amendment 2 that Renee asked us to be on. I have to admit, I was a little disappointed last night because I don't think it was anything intentional, but there was an opportunity where a parent from Arizona shared positively about the reasons to vote for Amendment 2. And it would have been great if we could have had, some parents get to speak in opposition to it. They did show the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky talking about how they want a no vote and how they don't support it, which was good. But all in all, it was just a continuing conversation with Jim Waters and the Bluegrass Institute. And it's kind of hard talking with him. Did that back over the charter school issue, and I've done it many times before. And, Bluegrass Institute really doesn't know much about public education, although they like to call themselves a think tank. And so it gets a little frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, I mean, lots to unpack and dive into here. You have been a superintendent in a couple of different districts in Kentucky. You're doing some things now with the Protect Our Schools campaign, but you have a pretty interesting background when it comes to. I remember meeting you a number of years ago as Department of Education, but your background in superintendent's a little more unique, and I also think that gives you a even more unique thing when we look at the implication to schools. So tell us a little bit about your educational background up into your superintendent roles.
Okay, I'll try to be quick through this, but I actually, my mother was a teacher, and I actually saw what teachers went through and all the difficulties in the 70s and 80s. And so I decided that wasn't the route I wanted to go, even though I originally thought I would be a history teacher and a football coach. And so I went into the business world, went into accounting, and spent just right at 10 years there. But in 1995, a gentleman by the name of Stu Silverman came to Davis County as superintendent. A good friend of mine who happened to be assistant superintendent there introduced us. And Stu hired me because he wanted someone from the business world to come in and take over operations and business and finance for the district. So I worked in that role. I had already was a CPA and an MBA at the time, but I went back and got a second master's in educational administration and began work on my doctorate. And so Stu promoted me to assistant superintendent. And in 2004, he told me he was leaving and going to Fayette County. And I said, over my dead body. But he left and went anyway. And shockingly, the board asked me to serve in the interim superintendency when Stu left. And although I was certified as a superintendent, I was at that time the only alternately certified superintendent in the state. And subsequently, there's one more, my dear friend Matt Robbins, who's just retired as a superintendent in Davis County. But there's only two of us who are alternately certified. I served as Davis County superintendent from 2004 to 2011. And then Stu retired in Fayette, and I followed him again and was superintendent in Fayette from 2011 till 2015. Subsequently went to the Kentucky Association of School Superintendents and ran that organization until I retired. I don't know if you want me to get into what I've been doing since I've retired, but at this point, my wife clearly tells me regularly, almost every day, that I'm not really retired. Jamie, you're muted if you can hear me.
You're right, and I did that. So as we think about your background, we'll get back around to your current thing because I think that's going to wrap around in this conversation. But as we think about that, all superintendents have to be versed in finance and background and the physical impact and the advocacy that goes with the finances and all of that. But as you think about that, let's really zero in on Amendment 2. A lot of people say this is all about school choice. It's about allowing parents to select. But when we think about school finance and school funding, what are the real things superintendents are most worried about when it comes to financing, especially for school districts that, for most of our counties, probably all of our counties, are the largest employer, if not the largest employer, one of the largest in every county. So what's the financial implication we're looking at here if Amendment 2 would pass?
So I know we're going to get into this a little bit in a few minutes, but I think Amendment 2 is basically a concerted effort to privatize education. And what I mean by that is that, we've gone through the attempts at pension reform, as they called it. We've gone through House Bill 563 on private school tax credits, HB 9 on charter school funding. And this is just an extension of that attempt to privatize education. And what I mean by that is that if you go back and study the basis of most of these groups that are lobbying and influencing our legislators, what they're hearing is that public education really should not exist. It really should be private and should all be based on what they refer to as school choice. Now, as you just said, that's just really a talking point because it's truly not school choice. To your point, 63% of our counties in Kentucky do not even have a private school. So there is no school choice. In addition to that, if you look at where the private schools are, more than 50% of our private schools are in 3 counties: Jefferson, Fayette, and Kenton. And Jefferson County has a third, of the private schools. So where's the money going to go? It's certainly not going to go to our rural areas of our state, which is the majority of our state, as we all know. Kentucky is very much a rural state. The average school district's about 3,600 kids in Kentucky. And the poverty levels are high, as we know. So what's going to happen is we're going to lose education funding for our most needy kids in our most rural areas and send it to private schools in a very select area in the Triangle if House Bill 2 or Amendment 2, as it's now known, is to pass.
Yeah, and I think I think I've seen some conversations and just kind of getting into this debate with again trying to frame. Tom, I don't know about your house, but I get 3 or 4 mailers a
Mm.
day supporting. But I think that should be a telltale sign for the where this push is really coming from, right? When we talk about special interest and we talk about folks that have a business profit model in mind and not a student centered model in mind. And I think that's the danger that those of us that have been involved in education, we need to convey to our neighbors that are showing up at the polls, because while some of these messages may seem okay, this model's not worked very successfully in many states, and in fact, it's been detrimental to public education in most states. Can you speak to how Kentucky? You mentioned a number of bills we've held off. We've been very fortunate that we've not allowed the progress on the other side to get where it's at. But as we think about the school choice and the special interest, can you speak to that a little?
Yes, I'd like to go back to those 2 bills that I mentioned, though, just to kind of frame how this attempt has been made and where we are at this point. So I've been a longtime officer and member and supporter of an organization known as the Council for Better Education, or CBE. CBE is the original group that sued in 1984 that led to the CARA and the Rose decision in 1990. I've been involved for over 30 years with CBE, and I serve as their executive secretary to this day. And when House Bill 563 was filed in 2021, this was kind of a floater that was about private school tax credits, and it's just another name for a voucher. So CBE, we sued. We had support from KEA, NEA, and several other groups, AFT, several groups joined in to support and work with us. And we won that at both Franklin Circuit Court and then at the Supreme Court unanimously in December of 22. Right on top of that, we already had charter school law that had come in 2017, which was about public charter schools that would be chartered by local boards of education, but there was not a funding model for that. So the General Assembly filed House Bill 9, which was charter school funding, and also created the opportunity for private charter schools and required charter schools to be started in Jefferson County and in northern Kentucky. The council again sued, and we won again. Now, why is that important to where we are with House Bill 2, Amendment 2? Is if you look at the wording of the amendment, it not only says that the General Assembly may look at options of funding outside the system of common schools, it sets aside 7 sections of the Constitution. Those 7 sections of the Constitution are the 7 sections that we have sued over and won in the past. So what has been realized is by our General Assembly and others here in Kentucky is that our Constitution is our last line of defense. It's our strength that's kept us from having these things happen before. So what they have done is they have appealed to these outside groups that you just referenced. Americans for Prosperity. There's a group started called Kentucky Students First. The group I mentioned earlier that's internal to Kentucky, the Bluegrass Institute of Public Policy. They're the primary drivers behind Amendment 2. And if you look at where their funding has come from, if you look at what's known as their CREF reports that are reported to Frankfurt, their funding comes from out-of-state billionaires, mainly Jeffrey Yass from Pennsylvania, who's put in over $4 million into their funding. So that's why you're getting all those mailers at your house. I have to tell you, Jamie, what I do with those is I put return to sender and stick them back in my mailbox, make my postman mad. But it's either that or I'm going to start a fire with them. But it's been crazy to see these out-of-state billionaires whose motivation is purely to privatize education. They want to check Kentucky off the list. Kentucky is a prize for them because Kentucky's strong constitution as I mentioned, has been what's kept them from doing this already. And so when someone says, hey, we can't even have the conversation, there's no real policy in Amendment 2, it's just about having the conversation. We already know what the policy looks like because they already tried it and lost. And so what they're trying to do is set aside the Constitution so they can do what they couldn't do before.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's kind of bring it around to kind of the work that you're doing now and engaged with the Protect Our Schools campaign. But most importantly, too, to that is that this is not a divisive issue amongst the circles we operate in with public education advocates. I know there's been some talk in the group of some folks that support it, but when we look at KSBA and KASA and the groups that have historically stood strong for public education in Kentucky, this is a unanimous voice. So can you speak to the work that you're doing and then the coalition of groups across the state that are also engaged in this work, getting the message out around voting no?
So last spring during the General Assembly, and when they were in session in Frankfort, and we knew House Bill 2 had been filed, the Council for Better Education officers came together. Matt Robbins was their president. Again, I serve as the executive secretary. I could go through the list of officers, but they're all current superintendents in Kentucky. And we had been successful, as I mentioned, against HB 563 and HB 9. And we know how to sue people. We're pretty good at it. But what we had never participated in was a political campaign. And so the officers of CBE said, okay, Tom, we know you've been working with our attorneys and with our consultants on these lawsuits, but we need to figure out how we're going to beat House Bill 2 and ultimately now Amendment 2. So Matt Robbins, who was president, as I mentioned, of CBE, and I went and met with some what they're called are general managers who work with political issues and with candidates to run campaigns. And we found out that, others, groups that you mentioned, were already having the same conversations. And so Kelsey Hayes-Coots from Blue Dot Consulting brought a group of us together in late March, early April. And we said, hey, let's work together because, as you said, we all agreed there is no disagreement here. This is all about protecting public schools. And that's, again, how we named our campaign. So we formed Protect Our Schools KY, Protect Our Schools Kentucky, as an organization. I serve as the chair of that. And there are 8 organizations who serve on the executive committee. However, to your point, we have over 120 organizations who've endorsed what we do, and they're statewide organizations, and they're working with us to defeat Amendment 2. And we all have to, look at this, as you indicated, and set aside any differences. We might not agree on everything, but, this is possibly the most important thing we've dealt with, in my mind, it is, in 40 years in education since Carroll was passed. Jack Moreland, who was the superintendent at Dayton Independent, one of the original founders of CBE and one of the original superintendents that sued that led to the Rose decision, spoke to superintendents, and he said, if Amendment 2 passes, it will undo all the progress we've had over the last 40 years. And so we're very strongly working together. We have committees and meetings weekly. There's events all over the state. In addition, there's some other organizations that have stepped up, and worked with us, and some that are just taking the message and sharing it. But the important thing is it's a consistent message, and it's consistent about the fact that, our public schools are basically being defamed. I made a post today, that anybody follows the Council for Better Education posts on Facebook or X or Instagram, or also me personally on those. It's such a shame to me that someone takes a test score like Bluegrass Institute last night tried to do over our recent assessment scores and tried to say that our public schools are failing, when, first of all, they don't even take a test or have any assessment. Secondly, they select their students. It's not going to be parent choice. It's still going to be school's choice. And three, as we know, poverty is one of the biggest barriers to a student's access and success. And the average private school parent makes 150% of what the average public school parent does.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have a number of, you mentioned Matt Robbins a couple of times. He's actually going to be one of our guests coming up. We talked to former Commissioner Jason Glass. He's going to join and do a recording with us. This Kentucky Student Voice team, they're going to be lending their perspective. And so, like you said, there's definitely a united front of folks that the Pritchard Committee is another organization that's been a very strong advocate and getting the message out there. So that united message has been really, really important to the folks in our group of our 30,000 members in the Facebook group. We have shut down the site for 2 weeks. We've had some people that thought that was a little overdone, but it is the importance of the time, because we truly believe if we don't win this issue, all the other things that we were trying to work on in education just get that much more difficult. So for the next 2 weeks, we are focused on this Amendment 2 issue. We're putting a lot of things on our public site so that it's not just within the group. Conversations like this, we want this. We need our teachers to stand up. We need our education advocates to stand up and be vocal, to share the messages, to get the right information. You're not going to be getting 3 flyers a day in the mail saying vote no. But what we can do is use the power of social media, use the power of our communities, our networks, to make sure that people are getting the right message. Because I think part of the strategy is to confuse what it really is, right? And I think sometimes these constitutional amendments, voting yes and no, can be very confusing because of the way they word them. So I think there's probably some intentionality behind that. But that message of vote no on Amendment 2, I think it's going to take all of us down the stretch. So appreciate all that you're doing through your different points of contact and through the Protect Our Schools campaign. I shared in the group a little bit ago. I know that you all have a number of public stops the next 2 weeks coming up as well. And I know the Voice team as well. Any closing thoughts for our audience as we close out, Tom? We appreciate your time. So any remaining thoughts for you?
Well, I would just share that the Council for Better Education, as I mentioned, we've been around for 40 years, and we monitor anything that affects our public education financially. And so, again, I think that's something that we can all agree is important. We're already extremely underfunded in public education to the point of about probably $2 billion a year, considering inflation since 2008. And so I would encourage everyone to follow the information that we share, because I can tell you when Amendment 2 is over, our battle is still not won, because we need adequate and equitable education for our public schools so that all students can be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to emphasize that last thing in closing that you talked on. You talked about how successful you've been in judicial challenges, right, in the court system. We lose all of our leverage with Amendment 2, right? Because now the conversation is very, very different, and so that's the reason this battle is so critical for our public schools. So again, thank you for your voice, thank you for what you're doing, thank you for joining us, and for all of our members, we look forward to these continued conversations over the next 2 weeks. Get out the word, get out the vote. Thanks, everybody.